History. History is long. History has taken place over a really long space of time, a really long period of time. Most of us struggle to comprehend the vast expanse of the time through which history has unfolded. Our minds, I believe, are not designed generally to be able to deal with those vast expanses of time periods. I think that it either is a certain struggle that we have mathematically or arithmetically with huge numbers, or we're just not designed to be able to comprehend changes or expanses of time, large expanses of time. Because if you think about numbers, there's a lot of people who struggle with, big numbers. You start to get to a million, it becomes an issue. You go to a billion, people completely struggle. They just completely lose it. You find people saying, such and such a person has so many billions. If they were to give so many people, all people, a billion each, that still have change left, and like that is not how those numbers work. Some people say if you were to give a lot of people, maybe a whole population, a million each, that person will still have some money left. I'm like, that is not how numbers work. That is not how those things work. And even if that person was to somehow actually have that money to be able to distribute it, and they actually did distribute it amongst a population of people equally, the number that each person would get would be far lower than a million. And people just struggle to comprehend and deal with those numbers. And it's just, I guess, I wouldn't say a flaw, but just who we are as human beings. And the same applies now if you go to history and you think about how long it has taken for things to progress to the point that we're at today, for people to evolve to the point that we're at today, for the world, for the earth itself to be born and then evolve through time, through eons, to be at this point that we are at today. It is very difficult for a lot of us to comprehend how that has happened. If you think about it, everyone you've ever known, like actually known, not people that you've heard of, just forget about it. People that you've actually known, people that you've seen breathing throughout your life. All those people have only been in existence at most for the past 100 years, which means that every single person that you have ever known has only been in existence since 1923. And beyond that, you don't know anyone there. Of course, there are those few outliers that maybe some people know, some of those people who are 120 years old, or maybe they died at 120 when you were only 15 or when you were only 3 years old, and you knew them, and they span back further into history. But in most cases, for most of us, most of the people who are going to be watching this, all the people they've ever known only span as far back as 1923. And all the people that they have known only span as far back as 1823. And it seems like it's a very, very long time ago, but like it's that link exists that, okay, I know this person knows that person from 1823. And it seems like, what? How is that even possible? But that is just how time goes. If you think about how you see a kid and then you go about living your life, right? Maybe it's you meet someone, or maybe a distant cousin, and you see their kid, like, okay, it's a little baby, 3 years old, and then you come back 7 years later, or maybe even 10 years later, and you come back and you see this kid, and this kid is now 13 years old. In your mind, you knew there was this kid, and you knew that you're gonna find this kid there. But in your mind, the way that your mind works is that you still imagine this little 3-year-old baby that you left 10 years ago, because that is how the mind works. That is how the mind deals with time. Unless you are seeing something progress and grow and evolve through time, you generally are stuck with the image of what they are, and your mind does not generate an image of what they should be at this point in time. And I haven't really looked at the science behind this, so I'm just blabbing here. But that is how you find most people do. You find people see a kid like, oh my God, this you're so grown. Like, well, yeah, when last time you saw me, I was a kid. But when was the last time you saw me? It was like 10 years ago. You flip and grow. Do you think you grow? Did you think that you were growing while I was just being stagnant? Of course not. Life has been moving. Everyone has been growing. But that is just how our minds are designed. Now, we found ourselves currently at a point in time where history is shaped. Okay, the current time is obviously shaped by history, right? But our recent history is such that, especially as Black people, actually as Black people, we feel that we amount to nothing. We are worthless. We have not created anything. We have not done anything amazing. We have not, we've just been at the bottom of the pecking order. And that is what we now understand to be gospel and understand to be a predisposition or a certain design that we have. And that is what we are. And that is what a lot of people actually believe, as much as there's a lot of people, well, a few people who believe the opposite. Most people actually believe this to be the case. The reason is that recent history, and I'm talking 100, 200, 300, maybe at most like 500 years ago, as far as 500 years back, our people have not have sort of fallen down the pecking order. We've gone down in terms of who we were, the stuff that we used to do, the stuff that we used to own, the kingdoms that we used to have. We've been taken over. There's been a huge shift in superiority, in leadership, in monarchies. And we now find ourselves in a state where we believe ourselves and each other to be far inferior than other races, especially than the white race. And I believe that the reason for this is that, of course, there's been a lot of history that has been, muffled and hidden and destroyed. But there's also a lot of history that is recent, that is advertised, that we are made aware of, that tells us and reinforces the idea within us that we are down here. We do not know anything. We cannot create anything. But if we actually start to look behind the curtain, we actually start to open up a couple of books, actually start to have certain conversations, check out certain YouTube videos, check out certain content that speaks of the kingdoms, that speaks of the greatness, that speaks of the creations that we as Black people have done, and maybe not just Black people, because Africa is so vast, spans so vastly through the hemispheres, that the pigmentation of people differs. But if you look at the history of what mankind in Africa has been able to create through time, you then begin to realize that history is actually very long. We just find ourselves in this short period, this short space in which things aren't happening, aren't going our way. But before that, things that we have done, things that were created, things that were built, the leadership that existed was incredible. And it's a matter of us tapping into that energy. It's a matter of us rewiring our brains, a matter of us shifting our mindset, starting to think about the things that we probably could be and not the things that we actually have become in recent times. Again, the way the human mind works is that you can do so much great things. You can be so amazing your entire life. You get to your 20th year of living and you fail at one thing and you consider yourself a failure. And that is the way that our minds comprehend life. That is the way that our minds comprehend time. That the entire 20 years, maybe we can discount the first few years because, you're just living under the care of your parents. You don't know nothing of what you were doing. But all this time that you spend succeeding and winning and doing great things, suddenly amounts to nothing to you because right now, in this 1 year, in fact, in this probably 1 month or even 1 week, you are losing and you're not achieving the things that you're used to achieving. You can then, just off of that experience, dub yourself a failure. And that is what essentially is happening to us. This comes from me having spoken to certain people, and I've realized that people still believe that actually a lot of people and that they actually believe that there's an inferiority that is natural to us as Black people, but it's probably because they are not aware of the superiority that exists, the superior history that we have built, amazing kingdoms. I mean, you can speak of the kingdom of Benin, you can speak of the kingdom of Kemet, You can look at some of the structures that have been built. You know what's another funny thing? I remember when I was in school, I learned about the Mapungubwe River and this golden rhinoceros from Mapungubwe, which is around the Zimbabwean area. But it's only now that I got to find out about Great Zimbabwe and all these other small cities, the Great Zimbabwe's that also exist. And I'm like, y'all decided to teach us about this small little rhino, cute as it is, and y'all don't think that great kingdom mattered. And that's why I think this is a marketing strategy that is working very well. And I'd like to talk about marketing, but on a separate episode. But it's a marketing strategy that has worked very well in that, yeah, we can create small things, but creating big, amazing things, y'all cannot create that. And we've believed that. We've grown into that. If you look at a lot of things that are stolen from the Kingdom of Benin that are lying around um, museums in the West, in Europe, you'll think, oh, okay, so some people did make these things and blah, blah, but those things were so valuable that these guys had to steal them. What other things were so valuable that they could not be stolen? Like, imagine the pyramids of Giza. I swear, if those things could be stolen, they'd probably be in some museum or in some landscape in Europe right now. They would not be in Egypt. They would have been taken, and we would still continue to believe ourselves to be inferior, not superior, inferior as we do. But there's actually a lot of things that we have done. But again, the time, if you think about the pyramids of Giza, these are pyramids that are estimated to have been built around 4,500 years ago. We cannot comprehend that number. It's very difficult for us to comprehend that number. 1 year is 365 days. Imagine how many years it is to cover 4,500 days. Just days, not even years. Now I'm talking years. This is the number of years way back that you have to go back in order to see the construction of the pyramid, the Great Pyramids. Now that is a vast amount of time that we simply cannot comprehend. If you think about, there's this place in Morende in Pumalanga. It's called Inzalo Yelanga, the birthplace of the sun. If you want to check it out, check out Inzalo Yelanga or Adam's calendar, which is what it's also called. It's a system of rocks that were put up as a calendar so as to tell time. So it's easy now for you to tell that, okay, now it's August, now it's June, now it's springtime, now it's this time, it's time to harvest, blah blah blah. But back then there were no watches or phones that are going to tell us the calendars. There were no printouts of, now it's the calendar, blah, blah, blah. No. People had to figure out a way of keeping track of time so that they know that, okay, Abana now, we have to start harvesting. Abana now, we have to start planting. Abana now, we have to move. Abana now, this is what we have to do. Now we should expect rain. In addition to looking for different cues throughout nature, there were certain structures that were built that shine shadows in different ways throughout the year, throughout the different phases of the sun, throughout the different phases of the moon. And we were able to understand that. And these are things that are believed to span back about 75,000 years ago. It's still an estimation, of course, and I'm just reading what I see has been written by other people. But what I'm saying is that's how far back that civilization was able, and not just civilization, but black civilization was able to come up with ingenious ideas of keeping track of time. Many of us today would not be able to build the thing that these people built 75,000 years ago. And they did it. They built it. It wasn't a very complicated thing, but it's so accurate that when the sun or the shadow shines there, it's spring. Spring has started now. Now we start doing this, whatever rituals, whatever traditions, whatever agricultural practices they do, they know how they have to start doing them because of those things. People understood that 75,000 years ago. Again, it is a huge number. And when I say 75,000, it sounds like, okay, it's a number. But people aren't able to comprehend how far back this goes. And this isn't just people, this is black people that did this. There's so many more amazing stories. I mentioned the Kingdom of Benin. There's the great library of Alexandria. Please go check out on that. At some point, Italy tried to invade, to take over Ethiopia in the Battle of Adwa, and Ethiopia won. They kept on beating those Italian butts repeatedly. And these aren't stories that we know of. These victory stories, we don't really know about them because we are told of the stories in which we lost, the stories that led us to where we are today, the stories that govern the recent history, the stories that have shaped the modern world today. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that we actually can then change the progression of time. We can then change the hierarchies. We can then change the powers of the world through time. It doesn't happen in one day, it doesn't happen in 2 days. It takes quite a long time. But if you look at the greater expanse of time through which we've lived, it actually takes a very short space of time. It's a matter of us shifting our mindsets, changing the way we think, changing the way we view life, understanding the power that each of us hold within us, and tapping into that and starting to take steps to move, to build, to create, to shift by understanding how it is that we got to where we are. Understanding that in the past 100, 200, 300 years, we came from having our own tradition to now living in a modern world that has been evolved from a different tradition of the Western white people. Yet here we are trying to fit ourselves into this modern world while bringing in some of our traditions. And that should be recognized to have been a mistake. And we should now see that, okay, so we came in with our traditions, right? And we're trying to live in the modern world. Why have we not adapted and evolved this so that it fits in quite well with this modern world? Because there's a lot of practices now, which I believe should be a separate episode in of itself. A lot of practices now that we do that really are to our own detriment because we're trying to fit those things into the modern world and they just don't work. For example, we want to now raise our kids, both boys and girls, to be doctors, but then we're still saying the girls should cook, the girls should do this, and then the men should do this. And then, like, when they get married and then they're living in their household, there's just a whole lot of fights and arguments because there's a whole power struggle. Because we try to make them be equal in the modern world, but then in the traditional world, they're not equal. But then these people should live in the same time frame, they should live in the same life. And that is just a recipe for disaster. And that is why we have all these troubles that we have in the modern world today, especially as Black people, because we're trying to merge something that is not ours with something that is ours. And, again, I'm saying this is a thing for another day. If I can just add one more thing, at some point in history, before the Europeans actually properly invaded South Africa, the Khoisan actually were the leaders. They were in charge of trade in the Western Cape, in the Cape. Dutch travelers, Portuguese travelers, they'd come in and stop there to refill their ships, to stop and have some fun, to just take a break from the ocean, refill the food reserves, their water, and all that stuff before continuing on to sail through to India. This was a port where that South African people controlled. They had control over that for a long time, for decades, and I think maybe even for centuries, until, of course, certain people decided that, you know what, we're tired of having to pay those Black people to get into or to get access to certain things. Let's now take that over. And there were fights, and the Khoisan defeated the whites, and they defeated the whites until eventually the whites won. But these aren't stories that you know about. These aren't stories that you hear about, because what matters to you now is that, okay, we lost. Not considering that, oh, we first won. So there is a possibility of us winning. There is the ability of us winning. We're just thinking, well, we lost. We're losers. That's what we are. And a huge mindset change has to happen. And I think it's important that we teach ourselves history. We look at the history books. We open the history books. Don't be lazy. It is very important to open those history books and look at the great things that have been done by people in this planet. And also consider the great things that have been done. Of course, a lot of white people did a lot of great things, but a lot of Black people did a lot of great things too. And if you start to look at the great things that have been done by everyone in this world, you realize that One person is not necessarily superior than the other. Whatever anyone can do, I probably can do. And if not me, then someone among us probably can do that. But if we don't understand history, if we don't accustom ourselves and familiarize ourselves with the vast expanse of space time, vast expanse of space time, then we may not ever see the day that we begin to prosper holistically. Black leaders used to be just leaders. They used to be incredible leaders. We used to lead with justice. That's not what we're seeing in the world right now. I would like to see that shift taking place, but it's something that a lot of us need to recondition ourselves to do and then start to understand and tap into that energy in order for us to build a better future. Thank you so much for watching.